Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast where a behavioral scientist examines what it's like to live a humorous life. Glimpse into the lives of the funniest people in entertainment, business, and science as your host, Dr. Peter McGraw, explores their habits, motivations, and secrets to success. Get ready to fire up your brain and your funny bone. Now, here's your host.
Welcome to I'm Not Joking, the podcast that looks at the lives of funny people. I'm Peter McGraw. Today's guest is Mike Reiss. Mike has won 4 Emmys and a Peabody Award during his 28 years writing for The Simpsons. He ran the show in season 4, which Entertainment Weekly called the greatest season of the greatest show in history. With Matthew Klickstein, he recently published Springfield Confidential, a memoir of Mike's 3 decades at The Simpsons. And Mike has published 20 children's books, though he has no children. Welcome, Mike.
Nice to be here. Well, that's a nice introduction.
Yeah, well, you certainly earned it. So I asked this of all my guests.
Yeah.
If you weren't working as a writer, what would you be doing with your life?
You know, I always figured I would just be a funny lawyer. I thought I'd be the guy who would rather get a laugh in court than get my client off. But I had no idea I would ever be a writer. Right up through college, I didn't pursue it. I didn't think I'd never met a writer. I didn't just know about it. It was just those guys and me. And I just figured, I'll go into advertising. I thought that's the peak. That's what someone who's creative does. But has to get a real job. You go into advertising.
Well, certainly, I think advertising's filled with creative people, artists who want to get paid.
Right.
You know?
Yeah, it was pure ignorance on my part. I just never met anyone who did it. And that was, especially, I grew up in the 60s where you'd see watching TV as a kid in the 60s, you thought, well, 80% of people work in the advertising business.
Well, and you strike me. You
Jewish, right? Just say it. I come off Jewish even on radio. So.
Well, yeah, certainly you've already started with a lawyer joke. Yeah. So, actually, I recently had a guest who talked about how much sort of Jewish, she calls it Jewiness, is starting to show up in the world of entertainment. Like references and so on.
She's just catching on to that 80-year tradition. Well, that's something.
Well, just that, like, sort of the breadth of it all, and that it's moving away from some of the standard tropes and stereotypes and so on.
Well, that's interesting. I don't know what to say. I can do it mathematically. When I started in TV in like 82, everybody was Jewish. I worked on a sitcom where every single writer was Jewish except Al Jean, my writing partner, and over time, it got less and less Jewish. And The Simpsons now, let's say, it's about 20% Jewish. Now, America is 3% Jewish. We're 20% Jewish. But we're talking about a business that 30 years ago was 95% Jews. I have this belief. It's just one of those things. It's one of those professions. We go, all right, this is not respectable. We'll make the Jews do it. And then they make a big success out of it, and then everyone else is, this is good for us. It's like the comic book business. I'm sure all the comic book writers were guys who couldn't get a job at the New Yorker, and so Jewish guys go into comics and create Superman and Batman and everything Stan Lee did, and then suddenly, Gentiles are going, this is a respectable profession after all.
That's pretty funny. So you, in Springfield Confidential, you talk glowingly about your non-Jewish writing partner,
Al Jean. Yeah,
yes.
I think the world of him. I was just working with him this morning going, how does he do it? He walks in every day for 30 years like it's his first day on the job.
Yeah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. This is just a hunch I have.
Yeah.
Are you a little tired of being funny? For a living, that is.
I just know I'm not as good as I used to be. I am a victim of self-imposed ageism where it just gets a little harder. I don't want to say I'm getting tired of being funny because you take that away.
Then you have nothing left. There's
I'm
nothing
just
else.
this machine that eats and poops. There's nothing else to me.
Well, are your children's books funny?
The children's books are all
They're
funny.
all comedic, yes. I see.
I tell this one story where I tried to write something dramatic. I wrote a sad, dramatic story. It's just a short story. There's 5 characters in it at the beginning. There's 2 funerals in 10 pages. Sad, sad, sad. I sent it to Esquire, and they wrote back, and they go, well, sure, it's funny, but... All right, this is what I do.
So let's talk about the writer's room. So I'm very interested in this idea of how comedy, and you talk about this in the book, comes from a collaborative process. There's not the lone genius. You talk about the issue between Sam Simon and Matt Groening.
Right.
And how, like, people wanted to crown one of them or the other one of them the genius behind the show. And the idea being is that's impossible because they needed each other. Mm-hmm. And then that's even impossible if you wanted to give 2 geniuses, because so many creative, smart people go into the making of this incredible comedic television program.
Certainly The Simpsons. There are shows, it's the new TV, which one person can do it. One person can be the auteur, but they can crank out 10 episodes in 2 years. And it's a great product. Or Fleabag. I think she took 4 years to make 6 episodes, and it's fantastic. But, she did in 4 years what we have to crank out in 2 months, 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And that's it. All when they talk about the golden age of TV now, and I agree, it's a pretty golden age, it's because nobody has to make 22 episodes year in, year out anymore.
Yeah, you can make it. They can be as long or short as they need to be.
Yep.
And then they can be launched when they want to be launched. Netflix doesn't demand a September launch and to the same degree because of advertisers and so on.
Right. And when we were kids, we'd hear about the BBC. Oh, why can't American TV be like British TV? And now we are. We make shows the way they made them, slowly, and, don't make more than you have to do. But plenty of great shows are made really by one person now.
Yeah.
Or one person, I think, working with a talented ensemble. Or you got a guy like Larry David, who gets writing credit on every episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm, but he's got a big support team pitching him ideas and that kind of thing, and surrounding himself with a funny cast who ad-libs as they go along.
Yeah, indeed. I remember reading Tina Fey talking about Lorne Michaels having this sort of, his approach was, for the SNL writers' room, was a bunch of Harvard Lampoon folks like you are, mm-hmm. with a bunch of sort of blue-collar Chicago style comics as being like the right mix in order to be able to create comedy.
Yeah, I got to agree with it. She picks it apart pretty well, and we all have different strengths and weaknesses. The one thing I'll say I'm very proud of is the Harvard Lampoon guys are learning the tricks of the other people. We use just the knock on Harvard Lampoon writers was it's just jokes. It's just jokes and jokes and jokes, and there was never a story and there was never character. But they've learned that,
I see.
A show like The Office is just amazing. Now, I knew Greg Daniels. I helped him get his first job, and then I hired him here at The Simpsons. And on The Office, he just created one great character after another, and then there was a point in The Office I couldn't believe where The Office kind of split into 2 offices, and he created a whole second office full of great characters. And I go, where did he learn that? Because he didn't learn that at the Harvard Lampoon, and he didn't learn it working for me. And it's just an amazing skill. I'll say it's something I don't have. I don't know how to do that.
Yeah. Rashida Jones pops up in there, and I think that's
it was just an astounding thing.
Yeah, it's very fun.
I think the public's just sitting there, all right, more people, but I was watching going, how did he do that?
So back to this idea of aging, funniness. So you were saying when we're set up, and Matt had told me about this. So you fly in to work on The Simpsons. So you lived in LA for many, many years, and now you're New York based, and now you fly in, you do your work, and then you fly out.
That is it. I'm like a thief in the night. I'm a carpetbagger. Just to give you the story, I lived in LA for 26 years. This is where my work was, and I hated it every single day. I hated it every day the way a man in prison hates it every single day. And so about 15 years ago, I think I cut down to a day a week at The Simpsons. I just come in as a consultant, and I come in every Wednesday. Now, The Simpsons is just an assembly line. It's not like the Wednesday that I come in as a special day. It's just every single day is a bunch of writers sitting around a table trying to make a script better. And I just walk in on Wednesday, whatever they're doing, I'm just pitching jokes. But so when I cut down to a day a week, I suddenly go, well, why am I spending 6 days a week in LA just to work one day? And my wife said to me, well, you complain the least in New York, so let's move there. And we moved to New York, and I would be flying back and forth every Wednesday. And part of the premise of this was the idea, well, The Simpsons isn't going to run forever. And now we know it's going to run at least that long. So I've been commuting for 12 years now. And I love it. I love.
Are you on the same? Like, are you on the same flight in
Yes.
the same seat? The
Yes.
flight attendants know you.
This is what drives me crazy. This is the state of modern air travel. Is I know them. I know them. I know the people, the check-in clerks.
They don't know you.
Week in, week out, they see my face. They don't know me, and I'll come in. I'll go, "How's your son in Alaska?" And they look at me like, "He's a witch. How does he know my life?" So
that's a fun sketch idea.
Yeah.
I think I'm planning on taking a sketch class. I'm on the lookout for sketch ideas.
Really? Okay.
that
You know,
seems like
it's
a
the
good
one
one.
thing I've never done. I've never written like an 8-page. I don't even know how long a sketch is, an SNL style sketch. I've written like 1-minute sketches for a show called Not Necessarily the News. And
Okay.
I've written every kind of TV and movie. I don't know how to write an 8-minute sketch.
Well, you and me both.
All right. Well,
Yeah.
I'll come to your class with you.
that would be amazing.
Yeah.
So I'm kicking, so I told you I'm working on a new book. I'm kicking around a lot of ideas from comedy. And one of those ideas is this notion of taking a bigger stage. And, so originally the idea came from observing Steve Martin's career, where he moved from stand up to TV to film and, and then all these other kind of roles. But I'm expanding this idea to even taking kind of not even just like a bigger platform like that, but also just sort of like a different attitude about life and work, in part because, so many of us just, as we're young, you just put in the time, you've put in years and years to get really great at this craft.
Mm-hmm.
And then you achieve some level of success. You could have kept just doing the same things that you were doing.
Yeah.
But you decide, I'm going to start writing children's books. I'm going to live where I want to live.
Yeah.
I'm going to make the schedule that I want to make, and so on. And I'm wondering how much of that, how did that come about? I mean, it sounds like your wife had some of a influence.
just the small, huge majority of yeah. That's it's sort of.
I mean, I have
to
say this
because I've had this blessed career, and especially I love this Simpsons show. I just never loved show business. Again, I didn't think I'd ever be going into it, and I love being with other writers. I like making jokes. I love to write.
You like the writer's room.
I love the writer's room. I love a good writer's room because I've been in certain other writers' rooms where they're a little dark for me or a little nasty, and I shut down and I can't do it. I need a very kind of congenial writer's room to be in, and it can't be a room full of kind of half-baked talents. Every once in a while, the jokes are on sort of this lame level. And again, I shut down. I'm a hothouse flower. I don't know. I just need a very special setup to do anything approaching good work. And I'm so lucky to fall into The Simpsons for 30 years where everybody's good and everybody's nice. That's something, whatever you take away for the next book, it's something I learned writing my own book, and then I've seen it backed up, which is the real successful shows are nice places to be. They are nice places to be. You know, I finished the whole book, and it was an Israeli reviewer. Some guy in Israel said, "Where is the conflict? Where's the controversy? What are you hiding?" And I go, and up until then, I didn't realize, there was no conflict. I had no dark stories. I opened saying, yes, there was conflict between the two creators of the show.
Yes.
And then about 7 or 8 years later, we had a bad day and a half here. And that was it. It was a day and a half where we were doing a crossover show with the critic and the two staffs were fighting. And that was a day and a half. And that's it in 30 years. And I go, and it makes sense. It should make sense. A happy place produces good comedy. But you don't hear that. And then, so I read Eric Idle's book about the history of Monty Python. They never fought. There was no egos there. They liked each other. They respected each other. And that's how it is. And the show MASH, Alan Alda's book, I read that one. And it's just sort of, it was a happy place to work. Everyone liked each other. So that's the secret surprise of making comedy.
I love that. You have an anecdote in the book where some writer, very difficult writer, and he got pulled aside basically by the showrunner, was like, "Look, if you don't stop being an asshole, we're gonna have to fire you." And his response was,
"Let me think about it." And it's a true story. And he went home and he came back the next day. He said, "I discussed it with my wife and she agreed. I can't stop being an asshole." And the thing in the story I mentioned is he's a brilliant writer. He's a fantastically funny guy, but that's not enough for this TV kind of environment. You got to get along with people.
Yeah, I love that idea. I talked to Chris Mazzelli, who runs the Gotham Comedy Club, and
great comedy club.
Yeah, it's an incredibly well run comedy club, and he has a saying to aspiring comics, which is "Don't be an asshole."
Yeah, yeah, and there's so much perception. We get this idea from, I guess, the old Sid Caesar show. Is that legend goes on? It was just competition, everybody yelling at once and trying to get attention, and I've just never worked in that kind of environment, and I believe it wouldn't be conducive to making a good show. Yeah,
I think that's really neat. I agree with you. So in terms of this sort of bigger stage thing, so yeah, you said, I'm going to live where I want to live. I'll fly in as I need to. You have the ability to do this, which is great. I agree with you. Like I could tell reading your book that you're a happy guy.
I'm very happy.
And so, you gravitate towards happy places, but you probably also make those places happier. And so
maybe the working title, it's so funny. The working title for I Eat Too. Yeah. The working title for Springfield Confidential was Smiling All the Time. Which is just the worst title in the world, but it came from IMDb. There was a discussion thread about me. And somebody said, I listened to Mike Reiss on the DVD commentaries, and he said, he sounds like he's smiling all the time.
You're smiling right now.
And I do. I smile all the time. And then someone underneath wrote, yeah, it gets really annoying.
Well, I think we have the name of this podcast episode, which I'm always puzzling over, and sometimes it comes to me during the podcast.
I just happen to be this way. And I've worked with some very grouchy comedy writers. Sam Simon. He was a good laugher. Things would really tickle him, but an incredibly prickly, dark, cutting man. A lot of people just could not work with the man. Literally the best TV writer I ever worked with. So very funny. So you can have any kind of attitude and do that. And one night I took NyQuil, I think. I had the night before I'd taken NyQuil, and I came in the next day and I was Sam Simon. I could do my work and make jokes, but I was just in a bad mood and cranky. And I saw, you can do it all. And I realized, it's just chemicals. He's got NyQuil in his system, and I've got Prozac or whatever it is that makes you a grinning idiot.
That's super funny. Well, look, if I can become a behavioral scientist for a moment,
okay.
One of my favorite studies was done by a researcher at Berkeley named Dr. Keltner. And he might have been at Michigan at the time. In any case, him and some other co-authors, they did an analysis of yearbook photos of young women, I think college yearbook photos, and they coded the degree to which their smiles were authentic or not, what's called Duchenne or non-Duchenne smiles. So the ability to have true emotion, true positive emotions or not. This is a genetic, learned tendency that people have. You're very high on it. That's very clear. What they did was they correlated the presence or absence of this sort of true positive emotion or not from the photos with a whole variety of outcomes in life. So, this was a longitudinal study. So 20, 30 years later, things like satisfaction with work, likelihood to have a happy marriage and so on. And lo and behold, there's a positive correlation there.
Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah, it's just these women are just easier to get along with. They find the bright side of things, and that has a variety of positive effects throughout life. So you have an obsession with the Marx Brothers.
I guess so. I don't know. Yeah, I was listening to a podcast about them this morning.
Okay, well,
I don't know. It's just people who love comedy love the Marx Brothers.
Why? So tell me why. Make a case. So, a lot of these, obviously people who listen to this podcast like comedy.
Yeah.
They're almost certainly going to like The Simpsons. But my guess is lots of them know who the Marx Brothers are, but don't have a love. If you wanted to convince someone to fall in love with the Marx Brothers, why?
One of the most amazing things about the Marx Brothers is they are, legendary, beloved, the Groucho nose and glasses and mustache.
Which is on the cover of my book.
Yes, exactly. No, I don't think any other comedian became a product, that represents comedy. But it all hangs on, I don't know, 5 movies, 6 movies, so few movies. I think I may get the numbers wrong, but I think they only made 11 movies and 5 of them are no good at all. So it's so, and some of the movies among their classics are like an hour long. So it's not a ton of material, but what there is just better than anything. And it's, Groucho Marx is probably the funniest verbal comedian ever. But you have him, and whenever there's a break in an action, you got Harpo Marx, one of the great silent comedians ever. And then you got Chico, who probably, everybody said, oh, this was a very funny man. And he's just the mortar. He's just he's the go-between between these two guys. So that's it. They're short, funny, dense, fast-moving movies that really work. I mean, people should just, if they have a question, they should see Horse Feathers and Duck Soup.
Okay.
There you go. That's 3 hours out of their lives to see the greatest comedies ever.
Yeah, I mean, the Duck Soup regularly ends up as the greatest comedy ever.
Yeah, I can't believe how good. It's funny. It's utterly perfect till the last 2 or 3 minutes. I've got to asterisk it. Where, and by the end, it's just it's as good as other movies. But up until then, it's super great. And it just sort of ends. They didn't have a last joke or anything. But yeah, Duck Soup, I don't know how. I'll bet I've seen it. I might have seen it 50 times. Okay. I know it by heart, and I still watch it, and I'm just sort of dazzled by it.
Is that part of the reason that you got into comedy?
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, I think this was always just in me, and that's what I responded to. I was thinking today, except that it dates me so terribly. I grew up in a family in the 60s where we would watch the Ed Sullivan Show.
I see.
And that was a show, just for younger people, it was a variety show in the truest sense. You'd get a singer, then a dancer, then a juggler, then a comedian. And I'd sit there through the whole show waiting for the comedian. And that was just something that interested me from the age of 4 or 5. I just said, I want to see the comedian. And I never wanted to be the comedian. And I never analyzed what he did. But I had this notion. I said, I would hear a good joke from a comedian and go, oh, I wish I wrote that. I never said, I wish I was that guy. I just said, I always had this image of a guy backstage typing away and then handing the jokes through the curtain. It was insane. But I knew there were writers, and I said, I want to be that guy.
And you became him. You actually wrote for the Carson.
Yes, I've achieved every one of my childhood dreams. And especially, again, to date myself, the show I loved growing up was Dick Van Dyke Show. And I never wanted to be Dick Van Dyke, and I didn't want to be married to Mary Tyler Moore. There was the character Buddy Sorrell, who was just this shrimpy Jewish comedy writer who's married to a big blonde, and he seemed to get laughs around the office, but never contributed much to work. And I go, that's what I want to be. And that is 100% what I became.
So I want to get back to Carson and a few other things, but I want to ask you about this because you're still a young man.
No, I'm not, but okay.
Yeah.
I am youthful.
Youthful.
I am a youthful 60-year-old.
Okay. Well, in today's age, that still can be young.
Okay.
I felt I've achieved everything I set out to achieve. It wasn't maybe as big and audacious, but nonetheless, I just got full professor. In many ways, I've been sort of thinking a little bit about what do I want the next 20 years to be like. I spent 20 hard years doing this. It paid off. It wasn't clear that it would. Do you think about this idea of okay, you've checked all the boxes. Is there a next chapter? What's the plan? Is there a plan?
There is no plan.
Okay.
I really everything, not only my career, just came at me. And then a lot of things, just to back up, when I was 38, I saved my money because I knew the life of a TV writer does not last that long. It's literally like being a professional athlete. You have 20 good years and then you're of no use to anyone anymore. So I saved my money and I had no kids and I lived frugally. And at 38, I retired. I waved goodbye to everything. And my wife and I started traveling. And I remember I said to David Merkin, one of the writers at Simpsons, I said, I'll work again if it's on a show I like, for nice people, on my schedule, and I have no responsibility. And he laughed and said, well, good luck with that.
Yeah.
And sure enough, for the past 21 years, I've found a lot of jobs just like that, including consulting at The Simpsons is one of them. I punched up 25 animated movies. Mm-hmm. I do a lot of that. Writing the kids' books makes very little money, but I get to I write the kids' book and they either publish it or they don't. Mm-hmm. There's no back and forth. I don't have to deal with a bunch of, a committee telling me what to do. So I found plenty of work, and writing plays. I started writing plays about 5 years ago, and it's been the most fun of anything. I would rather do that than anything, and it is the hardest profession to crack because nobody wants a new play. No play, even a play you think is a huge hit, makes no money at all for anybody. Mm-hmm. So nobody wants to risk anything on a new play. So, but I really enjoyed doing that. So I'm having much more fun than I thought I would have. But to look towards the future, I could go any day now, and I'm not being lied about that. It's not levity to it. Where I did everything I wanted to do. I've been to 116 countries. Mm-hmm. I've been to both poles. And I wrote my memoirs.
Yeah.
I wrote my memoirs. So literally, I don't care anymore. And I'm on a lot of bad plane flights, right? I was on a flight about a month ago where I thought it was going to crash. And I go, oh, geez, I still should. Oh, no, I did that. I go, all right, let her crash.
That's funny.
I was going to take 200 people with me, but I don't care. It's really been a nice and charmed life.
Well, thank you for doing this podcast then. Cause
this is the peak.
Yeah.
This is it. I can go, oh, my heart.
I once took a CPR course, so It'll be awkward, but I'll do my best. Let's revisit a couple ideas that I had. So you worked for Carson.
Yeah.
You got fired and rehired.
I got fired and he offered me my job back 2 weeks later.
Yes.
And it was like, what did I learn in 2 weeks?
Indeed. And so you and your partners would write tons of jokes.
Yeah. 60 jokes a day.
60
Al
jokes a
Jean
day.
and I each would write together 60 jokes
60
a day.
jokes a day. Then Carson would pick 12 of those jokes. Yeah. And then you said about 4 would still bomb despite those numbers.
Correct. It was, to give you it was about 5 groups of writers, each doing 60.
Oh, so
you would start with
it's 300. Okay, right.
300 jokes. The head writer would cut it down to 18. Carson would cut it down to 12.
Mm-hmm.
And of those 12, 4 would suck.
Yeah.
And people, the question I would get all the time about writing for Carson, they go, he's so funny when he bombs. Do you write him bad jokes just so he can bomb? It's like, yeah, that's what I do.
That's great. I think that this is something that people don't, obviously stand-ups and writers understand this, but I think the average person doesn't understand how much work goes into finding comedy gold.
Yeah. It's a craft for sure. It's not an art. I don't think I'm an artist, but I know, I write a tweet a day. I write 1 joke a day on Twitter. Mike Reiss, writer.
Okay. That's fun.
Go for that. And, I spend hours to make the joke great. And if people aren't loving it, I'll put another one up there. But just to get 1 joke just right. And yet still, after I did the math once, I think I've written 60,000 jokes in my life. And yet still, I put it on Twitter. I have no idea what the feedback's going to be. Mm-hmm. There are times my wife will watch me where I type up a joke, put it on Twitter, and then I roll the chair back. Like I think there's going to be
onslaught.
Of lights, and then nobody goes for it. And so that's it. I still don't quite get it.
Why do you write a joke a day for Twitter?
Someone just made me. It's like everything else I do in life. I never wanted to go near it. I didn't think so. When I sold the book, Springfield Confidential, they said you should go on social media.
I see.
Because I'm not on Facebook. So I go, all right, I'll go on Twitter. But I hate these accounts. They're funny people on Twitter and just, see me at Yuck Yucks and see me at Chuckles.
Sure.
So I said, all right, I'll make a thing of this. I'll try and write a good joke every day. That's what I do.
That's outstanding. You were the showrunner, season 4.
Yes, with Algie.
And so everything I know about showrunning, which is not a lot, suggests that you are indeed too happy to be a showrunner. Is that not true? Is that a sort of false premise that I'm working with?
It is funny. Algie, the year I retired, when I was 38, Al came running right back to The Simpsons. He spent 2 years as the number 2 guy, and then he's been running the show for 20 years, single-handedly. He's doing exactly as well as he did working with me. And if you do the math on that, it means I contributed 0. But he loves running the show, and he hopes he dies doing it.
Okay.
And I hated running The Simpsons.
So how are you two wired differently that he loves it and you hate it?
I don't know. I think he likes controlling the whole process. I don't know why. I don't know why he likes it. And it was one of those things that came up in the writing of the book. The editor said, well, Al's been doing this. Isn't anyone after his job? Isn't any competition? And it had never occurred to me. Why would anyone want the hardest job in the world?
So incredible. So
there's been no palace intrigue. There have been no attempted coups. It's like, we found someone willing to do this job who seems to actually like it.
I don't often plug people's stuff in front of them, but I do. There's a section of the book where you lay out the sort of time course of an episode and everything that goes into that episode.
Yeah.
You even build a joke into that. And I think if people are wondering, well, what exactly does a showrunner do to save us time? I think they should read at least that section of your book.
Yeah. I never give Matt Klickstein, my co-writer, enough credit, but that was the kind of thing he said, you got to put this in the book. And I said, no one's going to be interested.
It's very interesting.
It's 23 steps.
Yes.
To make a Simpsons. And I just thought it's the dullest thing in the world. And then I read the book on tape. And I'm bored out of my mind reading my own process, but it's in there and people love it. And I think it's the biggest takeaway from the book. Look how hard they work to make this show. And it's not a joke. I said, it's 23 steps to make a Simpsons. How many steps is it to do a liver transplant?
Right.
And I looked that up. That's 8 steps. So you could do liver, lungs, and heart with the amount of effort just to make one Simpsons.
That's outstanding. You talked about padding shows
Yeah.
and falling short, right? I mean, having too much content and having too little, and how depending on the writer's room and who's running it sometimes. So you were talking about needing to pad shows at times.
Yeah, Al and I, it was just, we had a very tough filter, very high standard for material, I think, when we ran the show together. And we were just always coming up short.
Yeah, so you need to fill 22 minutes, or is it?
Yeah.
That's what it is?
I think it was, let's say 20 minutes. I think it's 20 minutes now. And we would come in with 17 minutes. And, we would think of, sometimes we would just say to Fox, can you sell more ads? And they go, we sure can. But we found, creative ways to fill the time. And the best one that came purely out of desperation was to do a long couch joke.
Mm-hmm.
A long, we do a joke every week where they sit on the couch and it's 5 seconds. And we said, let's do one that's a minute. And we've done them that are 3 minutes long, and we bring in guest artists to do it. And even people who are sick of The Simpsons love what we do with a couch joke every week. And that was born of pure desperation.
That's fascinating. I know we're going to be short on time, so there's a few things that I want to make sure that I cover.
Okay.
So I think we might disagree about what makes things funny, but we do agree that Hot Fuzz is a great movie.
Mm. Yeah, they even fought me on putting that in the book, where I said, here's a movie you have to see. And they said, everyone's seen Hot Fuzz. And
I don't think that's true.
I don't think it's true at all. And it's a movie, Simon Pegg, I guess, right? He's in a lot of okay movies, and he'll do things, but he writes these movies that are so beautifully constructed. And Hot Fuzz is the movie. There's not a line wasted in the movie. It's very funny, but you'll get to the end of the movie and go, oh, he set that up an hour and a half ago with something else. They're so intricate. He did a movie called The World's End.
Oh, yes, I've seen that movie.
Which also, someone did the structure on that and found out there's so much more going on to that movie than you thought.
Yeah, which seems like sort of a group comedy, Hangover-esque kind of romp.
But there's a lot more to it. And, that's part of, I think it's a theme that keeps coming up here, which is you can work you can phone it in. You can do half-baked comedy and even succeed for a while, but you can also work really, really hard, and you should. You just should. Things come out a little better if you work really hard.
Yeah, it's I like the movie, in part because it's part action movie.
Yeah.
So it ups the entertainment value of it. It has a lot of it has the buddy element, the crazy straight, the classic kind of clown and straight guy there. I noticed that, and I was like, oh, I like that movie. I like that movie too. So we're going to have to wrap up, but this is actually a perfect lead into my final question. Yeah. Beyond Hot Fuzz, what are you reading, watching, or listening to that's really good?
Gosh, that's a tough one. Dana Gould, who wrote for The Simpsons for years, does a podcast, which I think is really great. It's a work of art. Better than any other podcast there, because again, he crafts it, and it's 3 hours long. It's this insanely long podcast when he could just put out, oh, here's an interview with my funny friend, and do a different one every week. But instead, he's got 4 or 5 balls in the air. He cuts between different stories. He clearly edits, which a lot of podcasts don't.
Including this one.
Yeah, and that's it. There's a lot of good podcasts out there. I'll plug the Dana Gould Hour.
Okay.
3 hours long. The other one is just the obvious contenders. I watched Fleabag, the second one, which again, I just loved. You almost get tired of it because everybody's saying, and Fleabag, and have you seen Fleabag? And you go, is there nothing else that great out there? But it's a good example of the fact that the woman who made Fleabag the first season did not want to do a second season. She had to be nagged and begged into it. She took her sweet time. I think took 4 years to make what's basically 2.5 hours of material.
I see.
Just a long movie. There's not a minute wasted in that. Catch up on Veep. Everybody likes Veep. The last episode of Veep. episode of the series is the greatest last episode of anything.
Oh, really?
History.
Wow.
I saw it 3 weeks ago. I think about it every day, and it resonates with me because for 28 years we've been trying to think of a last episode of The Simpsons, and I've never had or heard a good idea.
It's very hard to wrap these long, running shows. They're
bet.
always going to be disappointing in some way.
Disappointing is one thing. People hate them.
Sure.
Game of Thrones or Seinfeld, they
Hated
those
it.
last
Yeah.
episodes.
I had Matt Walsh on from Beat on this podcast. It was a very nice thing. So can I make a quick observation?
Sure.
I think sort of interesting listening to you is your interest. So as a joke writer, you are primarily a joke writer.
I am a joke writer. I think I have a little trick I make a lot of jokes, and then I have the extra skill to kind of string them together and make it look like there's a story there.
I see. But you're really fascinated, in my opinion, from 41 minutes of talking to you, with this notion of story and character.
Yeah.
Right? So it's come up a number of times, like you admire it, talking about Hot Fuzz, right? A comedy with story and characters and so on. You got into playwriting, which is story and characters, right? Primarily. And you actually have had success as a playwright in a world that is very difficult to have success. So you had a play called I'm Connecticut.
Right. It won every award
that could be won
in Connecticut.
Yes.
And it drives me crazy because it's set in New York. It has Connecticut in the title. And so everyone just goes, well, it could only be in Connecticut. And it's like Oklahoma, that played outside
Indeed.
of Oklahoma.
Yes, that's right.
But yeah, I love doing
Miss Saigon
that.
has
I'll
also.
tell you the anecdote I want to keep getting to is I was on a panel with Dan Graney, who's a much funnier Simpsons writer than I am, one of the smartest guys I know. And they introduced me and they go, our next panelist is Mike Reiss, a true Renaissance man. And Dan Graney starts laughing. He goes, Renaissance man, him? And they go, well, Mike has written movies and TVs and mystery stories and plays. And he goes, he's just a lonely guy who sits at the computer. And I go, once again, Dan was absolutely correct. He summed it all up, where it's just everything I write is just sort of the same. It all comes from spending a lot of time sitting there trying to make it better. But it's, my kids' books are like my plays, are like Simpsons, are like animated movies. I just try and make them funny and kind of good-hearted.
Mm-hmm.
I want them to be clever. Clever is a very hard thing to sell in TV because you'll do something really clever and people go, it didn't get a laugh. And it's like, it's clever. The light bulb doesn't get a laugh, but it's awful clever. I'll tell you one more thing.
Sure.
As time runs down, because I get the question a lot. Is there a joke you love you never, didn't make the cut? And it was a joke in the movie The Lorax, animated movie. I helped write this thing. And anyone who's read The Lorax or saw the movie sees it's all about a company selling Thneeds. You see Thneed on signs and billboards. Thneed, Thneed, Thneed. Dr. Seuss word. So I said, hey, at the end of the movie, have the Lorax move the N in Thneed 2 places to the right, and it'll say the end.
Ah, yes.
And
very nice.
That's it. Yeah, it's the kind of thing comedy writers, they call that a find. That's a joke just sitting there waiting to be found.
Mm-hmm.
And I wrote that joke and I go, well, I've earned my pay here. And then what happened is what happens in animated movies. Any joke you give them, they go, all right, now we'll save it. And instead of just having him move the end, they made a 45-second piece out of him struggling and sweating. And I saw it. I go, well, they took all the funny out of it.
Yeah.
And so it's not in the movie. And in fact, the Lorax is another movie, just ends. It just runs out of time. There's no joke at the end. And that one drove me crazy. And again, it's not even self-pride. I feel like I'm just the guy who found that joke sitting there and then they didn't do it.
So the work, so there's really, I think, fascinating work. And I get this question a lot about sort of the limits of the benign violation theory, which clearly has some. I think one of the places that it really bumps up against limits is the notion that humor arises from things that are wrong yet okay, or as we call them, benign violations. doesn't do a good job explaining clever.
Yeah.
And so I like to say that the benign violation theory is a ha-ha theory.
Yeah.
But what you're interested in is aha, right? These moments of insight. And I think that, moments of insight are pleasurable even though you're not necessarily laughing.
Yeah, that's it. I'm a big fan of those. But
yeah, and the best, of
they
course,
don't pay the bills.
bring them both together in the same moment. Well, Mike, thank you so much. You're actually on your lunch break. We're on the Fox studio lot doing this. There are people outside starting to congregate.
You're
so
keeping The Simpsons from being funny.
People will be pissed by that. So I'm going to say thank you so much and cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to visit petermcgraw.org for more information about our guest, show notes, and social media links. If you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe and share with others. Join Dr. Peter McGraw next week for another fun, fascinating conversation on I'm Not Joking.
Yo.